and welcome to the Square Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Moot, Head of Developer Relations here at Square. And today I'm joined by Eric and Alex from Headpinz. Eric, tell us a little bit about Headpinz and what it is that you do there.
Sure, absolutely. We're a chain of entertainment centers in Southwest Florida. We have everything from bowling to laser tag to game zones, multiple restaurants, bars, and soon to be adding an indoor racetrack. I'm the chief information officer for Headpinz, and then we're also joined by Alex here, one of our lead developers.
Hello, I'm Alex. Piggybacking off Eric there, with all those different entertainment options and attractions we offer, I pretty much take over integrating them and making our whole ecosystem kind of work as one when we're dealing with all these different systems, from scheduling all the way down to buying a burger, basically integrating those and overseeing the IT operation side of it.
Awesome. And so I don't know if this was quite mentioned, but how many locations are you guys in the Florida region?
Right now we're operating two. Three. Two in which are Headpinz. We're actually making a transition from a traditional type bowling centers to more of a hybrid type environment where we have those leagues on Monday through Friday that people are used to, seeing for the traditional bowlers. But then on late night, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, we're very much an open bowling venue, opened up for families and all that good fun with laser tag and such.
Very cool. And so part of the reason that we're talking today is you have built an integration with Square, and it's quite interesting, but I'd love to hear the story about, were you using something before? What made you go into using Square? Tell me a little bit about what drove you into, using Square through your locations.
Yeah. So a little bit of a backstory. We were actually used Square before our current POS provider decided to do a partnership with Square. We originally started using it for to-go orders during the COVID era when the bowling centers were shut down and we needed to find a way to get our cooks in that working. So we used Square Online and they were doing to-go orders and meeting them right at the door and delivering that food. That has since grown into where we've actually made Square our base and our truth of everything. And that's been a multi-year project, but everything that we do now, including the front-end point of sale, our kiosk, our web reservation, anything that is touching financials are now funneling through the Square ecosystem. So a big change over the past 3 years. And as a matter of fact, just over the past couple of weeks, as we've finally moved our final processes over to the Square ecosystem. So that's been great. Then where Alex comes into play and where the development actually came from was there was some third parties that just simply did not work with Square, such as one of our kiosks and a couple other small little things like our group function where they actually sign a contract and actually take a deposit. Those things weren't working with Square. Alex came along and worked with the Square ecosystem on a solution to that. He can speak a little bit about how our kiosks work and such. Even though they're not a native, Square partnership, we got it working on our own.
Yeah, I'd love to that's one of the things that really piqued my interest is, you have, I don't want to steal thunder here. At the front of the venue, you have these sort of kiosks where it allows somebody to be able to purchase, various other things other than bowling. And you built this all yourself, essentially. Tell me a little bit about the integration that you built with these kiosks and how that all works.
Yeah, so it started from a position of when we first got the kiosk, one of their native integrations was another payment provider. And kind of where we came in was, okay, we have these two different systems. You have Square on one side and this other provider on another, both doing, different transaction fee rates, different handling, different view of transactions. And it came up one day in our operations and kind of just our discussions of, can we unify these systems? And that led kind of down the rabbit hole of the Square terminal API was kind of our first dive into everything Square developer.
Mm-hmm.
And it came along of, okay, we know that Square offers this, that we can use this for payments, even that without sending, a forward or doing a whole POS based Square install. Let's try some things. From there, we used the terminal API to start listening for those transaction requests that our kiosks were sending, host those on a cloud provider, and it listens for those requests. When it sees one, creates a payment request to the terminal and treats it just like any other would. To the kiosk, the transaction is completely seamless and paid, and to Square, it's seeing the payment come through, just as any other transaction, which started kind of our path of Square being our source of truth and opening up the doors of this could be our full ecosystem, even if it's not natively provided by Square and natively provided by our other vendors.
Yeah, and so for the kiosk itself, I'm wanting to sort of refresh and also highlight for those listening in. You primarily do these like a bowling venue, and then you have like other things like arcade, food and beverage. You're gonna be having like the go karts. And what all does the kiosk cover in terms of like the guest experience?
So on your kiosk, it basically covers everything from bowling. We actually have two different types of kiosks. One that is covering bowling, and then one that covers all of our other attractions. Those are the ones that you see when you first walk into the facility. From there, you'll actually be able to schedule laser tag, axe throwing. You'll be able to buy a game zone card, which is the card swipe system on the game, as well as schedule racing at our other facility that'll be just across the parking lot that's currently being built. So it's really a one-stop shop. Bowling's not handled there because a lot of that does come in through our web payment system. You're booking online ahead of time. These are kind of like those extra attractions when you walk in the door and you're still waiting for your lane, or you want to find something to do in the interim while you wait for your food. That's kind of what these kiosks address.
I see. And so one of the things you sort of touched on is like, using Square as a source of truth. What kind of like drove the desire for having that? I mean, and I only ask because like, I've talked with other people, they might, say like have like an ERP system or like, their own bespoke solution. And, what kind of started like getting you into the mindset of driving towards using Square as your source of truth for, customer data, order data, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we had a plan to, keep moving in the direction of Square wherever possible. However, some things along the way kind of just started to kind of pick up and get aboard the path and the ecosystem. As we were seeing, it's just easier to funnel the data through Square. That gives us a centralized system to look up all those transactions. Just a centralized system to get all of our financial data over to our online provider for finances was important to us. And then along the way, we discovered that we were writing all these different tools to make this happen. And we didn't need it. As long as we got the transaction into Square, it was going to do the rest for us. So it really has become that seamless experience. We've taken it a step farther, and Alex can, mention a couple things about this, but we're even going as far as the Square catalog is now that centralized source of truth as well, because it didn't make sense to have to do, before Square came along, I had to put in price keys into 3 different centers, 3 different POS centers, or 3 different POS systems at each of those centers, and then get it all syncing back together. Whereabouts now, even those third-party providers, such as, things that do our group function reservations, are looking at the Square catalog. Our front desk bowling operation is looking at the Square catalog. So now we have one set of price keys, one set of financials, and you just have that seamless flow into our financial system. And if Alex, you want to touch about the syncing, because that is something that he custom built as well for one of the POS providers to make that happen.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that, because it's like how often I end up hearing about people trying to sync things between various different systems. I'd love to learn how you sort of approached it here.
It's so hard to do it by hand, so I'm glad this worked out.
Yeah, so it started as kind of a part of our discussion of we're a very report-heavy company, and we really like to know what people are doing in our centers. We like being able to have an idea of what's going on. So it started with, okay, our reports at this point were just showing, here's a custom amount transaction coming from a kiosk, or this kind of uncategorized revenue that we knew was coming in certain ways, but we didn't know what people were actually buying. So we started down that path, and it came upon a point of, okay, we're managing 3 different centers of POS systems here. We're managing 3 different locations of different products. What can we do to centralize this? Started with kind of our group functions, especially because they were a really good example of, you have hundreds of different price keys that each center might use, different pricing and all that. And we began down the path of creating a system to actually synchronize the Square catalog to our group function booking system. That my thinking there kind of started with, okay, so Square organizes items by category, and it can have these different prices, different availability locations. Um, Whereas our group function system really only has like, one category layer, or kind of, it has the ability to do those price keys, but not as in depth as Square allows.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with the idea of every location that's available, we're actually going to treat as an independent price key on the vendor side. Whereas to Square, it's one, we're actually going to create 3 price keys. So if we create a group function price key for, an hour of bowling, on the Square side, we're seeing, that uniform price, the price over it, any overrides for the location, where it's available. And then I'm turning around and taking that information, including the category, and it's kind of the setup of it, and creating 3 separate keys off of that and saying, hey, all 3 of these are related back to this one in Square, but that vendor system doesn't need to know that. That synchronization handles all of that actual communication. So if we update the price for one location, it will only update that singular version on the vendor side. But if we wanted to update all 3 at once in Square, that would just be one little change, and then the system would synchronize those changes over to the outside system. The biggest hurdle that we kind of ran into is Square keeps everything very clean in its catalog. It is very kind of intuitive. A lot of these outside POS systems have these layers of complexity that we didn't feel for at least our setup need to exist. And Eric could explain more on that, of just, we don't need to go through 5 pages to find one price key, whereas Square has it right ready to go. And we can set up kind of how intuitively a customer or a staff member would actually want to look at that.
And that reminds me, Richard, this led us into a whole nother web of what we could do marketing wise, because we were originally only just using Square for food and beverage, but then as it grew into our other POS systems, as it grew into bowling and laser tag and the game zone, all of a sudden our marketing capabilities, the doors opened wide open. We can now see that, when a guest walks in the door, are they simply coming in for bowling, or are they coming in for bowling and buying a couple of drinks and buying food, buying laser tag? We can see what portions of the building that they're actually utilizing and do more direct and particular marketing to them. Like, hey, why didn't you come, participate in axe throwing, with us? You did laser tag, but not axe throwing. Maybe here's a coupon for you to come back and give that an experience the next time. And it was really it wasn't something I was expecting at first, but once it all started flowing together and those transactions started coming from multiple different areas, that's when we really started seeing the power and what we could do with those different type of marketing campaigns.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that, there's a period where it felt weird to like sort of promote this to folks, because, it's like, it sounds like, oh man, this is like, high level amount of tracking, but it is like really like, I'm going to throw out some assumptions here. Please feel free to correct me if I'm off base in how this is working. But, you can see a particular credit card come in and say, you have no idea who this person is when they first set a foot in the door. They probably may or may not have a reservation for bowling, but they go to the kiosk and they're like, oh, I'm going to go get some Game Zone cards for my kids. And then, like send them on their way to go like play in the arcade. And then I'm going to go buy some food. And you're seeing this credit card making each one of these purchases. So you're already creating a profile of this particular customer. And then when they go to like, say, maybe they paid for the bowling online, and you might already have like, have this profile. As soon as they do that first transaction, you're like, okay, we now know this person's here. You actually know how far ahead of their appointment they're there, because they're immediately starting to do these purchases and like leading up to maybe their reservation time. And it's like one of those things where like when you have this integrated throughout your entire system, you realize like you can see so much more about customer behavior. And it just sounds like so much more interesting in a place where like there's like all of these different opportunities for like, the go-karts, the arcade, the food, the actual bowling itself, that you can like really sort of see what are like the main things that certain cohorts tend to gravitate towards. And like, I know that we in like a pre-call, we talked a little bit about like how you can like build different marketing campaigns of like, hey, how do we encourage a little bit more of like go-kart usage? Maybe we can like send, something a few hours or a day or two before somebody's like reservation to be like, hey, here's a promo for like doing this while you're already at the venue. So it's just really powerful.
Yeah, especially with we do a lot of that through the smart groupings now. leveraging that data on when they were there last, and particularly what category of stuff did they actually purchase. So, just to give an example of something we launched yesterday was just a basic survey to guests that were bowling in VIP, because we want to know, hey, did you get your complimentary chips and salsa? Did a manager check on you? And we're already seeing within a 24-hour period, we just launched it last night, dozens of these surveys coming back of people wanting to give us the feedback, and we're just simply sending them a Square gift card in return. So we're gathering data that's very powerful to the business and how it operates, and where we can fill in gaps of where we could potentially make more revenue producing opportunities. And we're starting to see it. So it's taking some time to leverage all that data, but it's working for us. And one of the things that actually encouraging them to give us more of that data is like our rewards program and such. So you mentioned you're following the credit card, but most of our customers, there's a good 20% or something now, which is really good for a rewards program. They're electing to give us the more information. So we are getting their name, their email, their phone number, and their birth date. And they're staying in a part of our text programs because they want to get the rewards to come back and do laser tag, or if they've never done axe throwing, come and do that. So we're leveraging multiple different things that are starting to come full circle. And I don't think we realized that as a company a couple of years ago. I think you can even ask, any one of our management teams, what was the goal here, and what did you envision this coming about? And I don't think they understood the full scope or the full circle, but we're there and we're now seeing the result of it, which is awesome to see.
Yeah. I'm curious, trying to think of how exactly to phrase this, but it started out with something fairly simple of the curbside pickup, during a time where this is the way to keep the doors open, keep some people employed, is doing this curbside pickup thing. And then it kind of grew from there. I'm just sort of curious, in that evolution, as you started to sort of plug Square into various other places, how is that sort of mixture between stuff that you just sort of had off the shelf, stuff that you've extended on Square? I guess I'm trying to sort of understand how much stitching together of things has gone on over time, or is it really just we just found something within Square that we can actually replace something else that we were using and then just do smaller extensions. How does that sort of grown over time in terms of trying to get Square working with any of these other tools that you use?
I think it was we started with the simple stuff. Obviously the off the shelf, the food and beverage was the easiest to get up and running, because that replaced our existing KDSs, any kitchen printers, any bar printers we had. That was a very off the shelf move for us. So right off the bat, we were able to move, about 15 to 20 terminals per location over to the new system. And our staff caught on to it quickly. It was just an easy flow. And then as that evolution started coming back around, we just realized that anytime that we got that data into Square, it was making all the back end stuff so much more easier. So we talked about the marketing, we talked about the web financials and all that. Whereabouts we were piecemealing it all together. So if we needed something from our front desk or we needed something from our kiosk, we were writing custom dev in order to do that. We threw out almost all that and went to basically writing Square orders, and it simplified the whole process of not having to have our own categories, not having to have our own financial mappings. So everything we're doing as of, and we might have probably just made the decision in 2025, but we're going back and looking at why isn't it in Square? So if it is currently outside of Square, why can we get it in there? And if so, how can we do that? And that's where Alex comes along and utilizing all those APIs and the resources that are available to us to see how we can accomplish that. Honestly, the main stumbling blocks are most of the time the third party partners or POSs that you have to work with, because you got to make sure that they at least have the open mechanisms to be able to grab the data that you need and push it to Square. If that's not there, it's totally out of the question. But thankfully, we've had really good partnerships with all of our POS companies, and we're able to accomplish that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's one of those things where it feels weird to start having the suggestion as a software engineer to other folks when you're basically sort of looking at the entire landscape of your business and saying okay, in order for us to answer, say, this particular question, it requires me to pull data from like 3 or 4 different places, and
Yeah.
like they're all in different types of formats, and then I'm having to sort of do some data munging to like kind of like, well, these are done in like the wrong time period, so I have to adjust it in order to work in like the same time period as this other data set. And like once you actually homogenize everything into like a singular system, you're writing less like throwaway code, is like kind of like what I think of it, because like these one-time reports are like maybe quarterly or biannual, that you're just like, oh, well, we really need to answer this particular question because it's going to let us know, like, can we run this marketing campaign and expect it to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, there's dozens of one-off code that we've been throwing out over the past couple of weeks just by pushing the data into Square. I keep, running into more and more of things that we're moving over. I said we just moved the surveys and stuff over. We just moved another POS, but not even a week ago while I was at BTO, Alex moved a game zone system over to Square as well. So we mentioned those game zone cards that you're buying at the front on the kiosk. We're actually now grabbing the data from the video games and every 15 minutes uploading those transactions to Square as well. So we know how much in video game play versus virtual reality versus laser tag, all that's now being funneled in. And that was I think for Alex, that was maybe a 2-day project. And we have another POS system that was linked into Square. It's been that easy for us.
One thing I do want to kind of circle back to, just because I'm interested on a technical level with the kiosk that you're using. If I recall, this is like a kiosk system that you got through a vendor, but the device itself, it's running on like a Windows OS as its base, which is kind of like part of the motivation for using Terminal API versus like, say, our mobile payments SDK.
Yeah. Yep.
Tell us a little about like building the integration with Terminal API and this device, because from what I've understood, like, thankfully the device that you have is like, fairly open in terms of being able to plug and play certain things with it. But I'd love just, tell us a little bit about like the app that you built and how that sort of works and communicates with this kiosk.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start from when we first started designing it, where I jumped off from was, I know we had provided by the kiosk different payment methods that I could do. There's ones that are hosted on site. There was cloud providers they had, none of which were Square at that time. So we found a provider that they had set up that actually was using a SOAP protocol to send out its transactions to what it assumed was a local server. And those transaction information was just a little, here's the bill ID, here's the amount to charge, charge it and move on. What we ventured from there was kind of almost pen testing that of, okay, can I intercept this and act as that receiving server?
Mm-hmm.
From there, it jumped to, okay, so now I got the request. I can take it in. I can serialize it. I know what my amount is. I know my bill information. I know what response it's wanting or expecting. That little piece in the middle that we've named Mercury, just because I use Greek god naming for a lot of our software just for the fun of it, basically acts as just a messenger in between. So it takes that SOAP request, translates what the charge should be, what any of the bill information, sends that to the terminal API to create a transaction, and then basically sits and waits for the terminal to reply or that transaction update and say, hey, I'm complete or I'm canceled. From there, I translate that back into what the kiosk is expecting as a payment response that just says, hey, was it denied? Was it rejected? Approved? What's the status? I tell the kiosk, yep, we're good. We took the payment. And it moves on just like it would request the normal vendor or the normal system that it thinks it's talking to. Basically just that messenger in between. So there's no creating of orders or trying to mess with the bill in any way. It's just going, hey, here's my amount. Translate this into something the terminal API can understand, and then translate the terminal API's response back to something that the kiosk can understand. And that became the philosophy for a lot of the software was, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel or make these throwaway reports or that throwaway code you were mentioning, we go, okay, what if we turn these into basically data pipelines and let Square continue to do what it's really good at with the reporting and the transaction handling, and just get the data to Square. Let Square do the actual work. We just act as kind of this in-between data integrator of saying, here's the data. Square can do whatever it needs or whatever it wants to do with those numbers for marketing, loyalty, rewards, business tracking, anything like that.
And Alex, you're currently working on, it's good to mention that V1 of this integration was done well over a year ago before we thought that, Square was going to be that total ecosystem and where we were going to funnel all of our data. So it basically started as a custom amount integration on those kiosks. And Alex can speak a little bit about what we're doing now. He's working on the full itemized integration for that kiosk as well. Now that we see the benefits of what we need to do there.
Yeah, with I'd almost compare it to a snowball. Is we started very small and controlled, and we started with this one-off kiosk integration, and then as we integrated more systems and more features of the different POS systems, I realized, and through discussion with Eric, realized we're doing a lot of the same actions over and over again. So instead of designing, 5 apps that communicate between the 5 different POSs, what if we do one that understands data and knows how to get it to Square? And instead of building everything from the ground up every time, we're just building these essential sort of intakes of data. So we take the data from the POS, let this centralized system convert it to what Square wants and what Square is looking for, and open that door to when we have a new POS, we're not trying to rebuild everything. We're just doing something that integrates. We got the data in this format. We already know Square wants this. Let's just intake it and format it how we need, which is really spout out development times. It's allowed us to, like Eric said, turn around an entire new POS onto the system in 2 days, rather than, having to go all the way from floor zero or ground zero of where am I going to go with this? Now we kind of have a set template of every time when we're moving forward.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. I mean, I had this silly, I thought in my head that it's this Borg, assimilator that's just as you bring in this new thing, it's just going to go, I'm going to assimilate you to funnel the data into Square and make this unified.
Yeah. And we would say no at this point if it couldn't funnel into Square. That's the amazing part about it. And the only reason those systems exist are because they're specialized systems like a game zone or running a go-kart or running bowling. So those are always going to exist in the FEC entertainment world.
I mean, that part I still is just I feel is very fascinating because I probably one of the few people in this world that will ask random people who own a business, what is it that you use to operate various different components? And in an entertainment center like this, I'm just surprised how many different types of systems that you need for managing different entertainment parts. I mean, most of the time we might just take it for granted, oh yeah, they got cards for the arcade, but there's got to be a whole system for you get the card, you got to load the card, you got to track how much is on the card. It has to communicate with each one of the game machines, which is then also going to communicate back to a server to say hey, does this person have credits?
Or multi-location. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I do wanted to touch on is even in you're handling payments for the game cards, you originally had this approach where you were sort of sending the revenue directly to your accounting software. But then part of this migration, you had this, win of going by having this go directly into Square, and Square then now syncs into your accounting integration.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of sort of saved you even from having to deal with sending your stuff directly into the accounting software.
Yeah, we actually had some of those one-off development things that were going on because we had to, a lot of them didn't have that native integration to the accounting platform that we were using. So Alex had these one-off tools that would run off in the middle of the night, basically exporting text or CSV files that could be ingested into the accounting software. So we've eliminated all those little one-off things. And as Alex was saying, it's kind of all using the same mechanism now. We're ingesting the data, throwing it into a Square transaction, no matter where it's going. So just overnight, we eliminated, probably actually within the past couple of weeks, 3 to 6 different little one-off import-export tools that are now just being ingested into Square.
Man, I mean, it's I feel like you're just telling my dream story to be telling about the ecosystem, because we love to talk about the ecosystem that we provide here. I think sometimes it's even hard to really understand what the ecosystem of products really is, and I think you have just the right mindset to be able to see like, oh, like, it's working in this particular area, and like, it kind of could work for this other thing. Let's try it over there. And like, you solve the small problem first, and then you kind of realize like, okay, well, now that we solve the small problem, we realize we can kind of have it solve more than just that, and you keep growing it in all these different areas. And eventually it's just like, you're now at this like point where like, if it doesn't work with Square, we're not really that interested.
we're not going to use it. Yeah. And it's kind of amazing now that I'll find myself scrolling through the dashboard or transactions. What's funneling through there is pretty incredible now that we can link all these transactions together. And our staff and our managers, our team, they all know that, anything that they need to manage now as far as refunding or voiding or crediting a customer, they go right to a Square tablet. It doesn't matter where they bought it in the building, whether it's a kiosk, a game, or online or bowling, it doesn't matter. They pick up a Square tablet. And you now have every single one of those transactions right there. With before, we were going into 3, 4, 5 different pieces of software just to figure out where to refund it. And at one point, we were going into multiple credit card processors to figure out, what went wrong or what needed to be refunded. So I find myself scrolling through the dashboard every once in a while going, wow, this is actually really starting to come together for us.
So I think the final thing I do want to touch on, because just to geek out on, is you built the integration for the kiosk system. So you're running that, I'm assuming, somewhere locally, or is that actually like a cloud solution that's like connects with the kiosk software that you're sort of like having like, I guess I'm more curious, like, what did you build it with? You have like a little like server that's probably like sitting there listening, waiting for, something to come through. Tell me a little about your tech stack is really what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So the first point I kind of went with was knowing that it is a payment provider. It needs to both be incredibly reliable, because you don't want a customer having a failed transaction, as typically, at least within FECs, a failed transaction or a pain point will push a customer to no longer use it. It's kind of an all or nothing of, if it's difficult, they just simply won't go through that flow anymore, regardless of what the end result would be for them. We then, using our cloud provider, found out we can integrate it directly into our network, essentially. So while it's a cloud hosted server and they handle, the uptime and making sure it's online, making sure it's reachable, making sure it's, healthy as an app, it's integrated directly into our network. So that kiosk is sending out a request to what it thinks is a local server running in the building. That goes through our networking system and then gets to our cloud provider. It processes that request and sends it back without really any points in the middle that neither system thinks it's in the cloud. Essentially, they both think they're working locally, and they both have direct access to these resources without any kind of pain points there.
It's funny that Richard mentions the computer sitting in the office, or the server sitting in the server room, because that is where a lot of this stuff started. When I first started, and where Alex first started, there was a lot of these one-off little servers, sitting around. But like he's saying, it's going through an SD-WAN solution at this point to the cloud provider, so it's just there, and there's multiple redundancies in place for that to make sure that continues to happen in any way, shape, or form. If we're losing a server, we might switch over to a broadband, and then broadband. Unfortunately, we don't have great 5G connections, but we could switch to a 5G connection if we absolutely needed to.
Yeah, and I think on the tech stack, a little bit of that app that provides some of that is, we knew going in we didn't have time to reinvent the wheel. We needed something that we could kind of develop quickly on, iterate quickly on. If something needs change it. On those one-off scenarios. So that was kind of our first dive into Node.js and using TypeScript, Node.js, and essentially an Express server that's processing those requests and allowing us to kind of quickly get things working. And I got to give some of that credit to you guys over at Square for that. Of your API is very developer friendly, probably one of the most developer friendly we've worked with in our different vendors, and with its multiple different kind of integrations, both with its direct SDK for Node.js and its direct different integrations with these different platforms and tech stacks, we're able to, take something that normally would take a week because we're designing everything for it, and quickly iterate and go, overnight, turn around and have a solution to integrate these different technologies. And that's been carried forward into pretty much every software of the Square API has been very developer friendly and very open to working with different data formats that we've been able to quickly spin out these integrations and get things up and running without, huge turnaround times.
I mean, that kiosk integration and looking back at on almost all the integrations, it was a 1 or 2 days of dev and we're right into testing. And the kiosk integration was one of the most flawless ones. The testing from day one, there wasn't one failed transaction. And then going into a weekend that has, 1,000 transactions in a weekend and not having one failed was pretty amazing. And that gave me the confidence and the entire team the confidence to continue moving forward with this.
I love to hear it. I mean, like it's one of the things that I've heard time and time again, and I feel silly because it feels like I'm just like singing our own praises here. But the ability to just like sign up for a developer account, get credentials, and immediately start like building and testing. I can't tell you how many times like somebody, started out with an idea where like they were at like a baseball game or like they had a coffee shop and they see the payment system there and they're just like, wait, what is this? Can I? And then they go look up the docs and within a week they have a proof of concept up and running and they're like, hey, I'm already like have a terminal device taking a payment and, they're shopping around within their company to be like, hey, we can use this. Like this can actually like solve the problem. And of course, like, eventually you have to build out to scale. So, you go through the process of like getting like Dockerized apps in your cloud provider and getting like everything strung up. But like, you have that moment initially where you're just like, no, like this can work. Like I've always believed in that. Like for developers, like you can convince them like in that moment, this can work. It's working for you right now. Like, yeah, you got to build out the scale and the reliability, but it's gonna solve the problem that you want.
Yeah, it's even more exciting when it's a known pain point in our operation that we can bridge. And a lot of times, the staff, customers, or management won't even realize the bridge is there, making that a simple process. Where about if you go to a lot of the one-off FECs that are single chain operators and that they might not have had somebody to be able to take that leap for them. So they are still doing, that multi-transaction and the multi-POS, and it's really a seamless process at this point.
Yeah. I mean, going back to like what you touched on earlier of, it still surprised me to this day of like, a lot of businesses or like other software providers or hardware providers for that matter, have this expectation that you might have this like literal server sitting in like a back office somewhere that's going to be connected to your network. That's like, no, I'm going to try and find this thing. I mean, like that's the whole reason that you're able to build this integration with the kiosk solution. Cause yeah, a lot of businesses have that. I've talked to vet clinics, law firms. Some of them have to for regulatory reasons. Like all of their system data has to be in this very controlled format, but it makes these integrations like a lot more difficult when, you have to then go talk to a vendor, get special documentation and like try to figure out like, how does this system actually work and how can we make it like work versus like, hey, here's like an open system where you can just immediately go and build and test.
And that weighs a lot of our decisions at this point is looking for that open API and what can we leverage and what can we do with it rather than focusing on the front end, the GUI. And what that's actually happening is, if we do need to do the one-offs or we do need to bring it over to Square, is that available for us to do so? And that's important at this point.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. For something like, an FEC, like, it's a very, you want to have it, how you build your business, because what you build is very unique. It's, it's your particular mixture of like having the go-karts, having the arcade, having the bowling, like, you're going to be able to, find a solution and build something that works for you guys. And instead of just trying to like, take stuff that's off the shelf and, hobble it together.
Yeah. And our team hasn't seen it yet, but, we're trying to focus a lot on selling packages and bringing the different attractions together so that when you're just coming in for laser tag or just coming in for bowling, it might be a little bit more enticing if you're, getting 50% off on your next attraction by bundling it together. Or, as I mentioned before, where Fast Tracks will be our go-kart place across the street, across the parking lot, essentially. So you're going to walk into Headpinz, you're going to be buying bowling, but you're going to be able to add racing to that all through one ecosystem. So you're going to be in one location A while booking at location B. And that's all made possible by pulling these pieces together.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the software is like literally enabling the cross sell.
Yep, exactly.
To jump in on that, I think a big part of that, at least for us, was a lot of these other vendors. There's vendors like that do our game zone that have been in this business for 25 plus years. They know what they're doing. They've mastered their little niche. And while it may not be something that Square provides or would go down the path of providing, we can make that work because Square is very open to understanding. Yeah, there are going to be things that, especially in an FEC type environment or these large business environments, you have these multi different essential ways that a product gets sold. You have bowling that's by the lane. You have go-karts that would be by the time slot. The arcade is just money on a card, that are all very different in how the user experience is and the business view is, that just wouldn't exist together, that we can make work together. So for a customer, they're checking out in one place and having that singular transaction rather than having to go through 5 different transactions to achieve the same result.
And it makes me think on the Square catalog side, like one of our providers for bowling, they simply just added a custom attribute that decides, is that price key for bowling, shoes, prize fund, whatever it may be, league bowling. It's just a simple drop down that decides where it goes into that front desk for bowling wise. So it is really that simple when it comes down to adding those keys and utilizing them.
Yeah, I really want to reiterate like what you said there, that is very important to like sort of highlight for other folks, of just like the different ways that you sell things. I've come through this time and time again, like just dealing with a catalog is, different types of businesses have different products that they're selling, but like, bowling is by the hour, but like the shoes are like per day. And then like, you're going to have all of these various like different things that like a very bespoke way of selling this particular product. And so having a flexible system that allows you to like unify that and can meet your needs as you have different things you want to add or offer. And there's a programmatic way to do it. I do want to thank you both, Eric and Alex, for joining me here in the podcast. It's been very enlightening hearing how you have such a tech-forward family entertainment center business. I would recommend anybody, if you're in the Southwest Florida region, definitely go check out Headpinz. You can find us at Square Dev on X, or you can reach out to us on our Discord. And if you have a project that you're working on, make sure to let us know about it. And don't forget to subscribe and check out developer.squareup.com for more. Keep building and catch you next time.